Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Life, the Complete Story. As always, I am your host, Tyler, joined by...
Hello, everybody. So today we are continuing our journey with the mollusks, getting to the biggest group within the mollusks, gastropods, which are your snails, slugs, sea slugs, things like that. But first, as always, we're going to start with our nature in the news. So Tyler, if you want to go over our article for this week.
Righto. So this week's article comes from science.org. It was actually published on the 30th of May. So this is 2 days ago on the date of our recording for this episode. It is the co-evolution with hosts underpin speciation in brood parasitic cuckoos. So the cuckoo is a bird. And they're kind of nasty. They what they do is they lay their eggs in smaller songbird nests, kind of kick out the normal eggs and lay their own egg, and they trick the songbird into caring for their baby instead of them. So they're like really bad parents, but also really good parents.
Yeah.
They just hire a nanny.
Basically.
But what we're seeing in these studies that they're doing is that through this habit of laying your egg in another songbird, you're allowing like a selective breeding type thing where you're laying your eggs in nests that are more closely related to your plumage. So as time goes on, you're getting a coevolution where they speciate into newer species because they separate far enough from the original. I believe it's called the bronze cuckoo. Is the
Yeah, that's the one that's showing up here in the article. So basically, like what you're saying is the cuckoos, they're young, they're starting to look more like the songbirds that they lay their eggs in because the songbirds are getting better at recognizing the imposters.
Right. So they'll boot it out. The songbirds are getting smarter at this, so they'll learn to kind of like kick the cuckoo out. So the cuckoos are having to adapt their plumage to be a more.
Well, it's more of the ones that have that adapted plumage are surviving. It's kind of the more
right.
the more technical way to say what's actually happening.
Right. In this article, if for our listeners, if you'd like to read up on it, like I said, it's on science.org. It is written by Langmore, Greeley, and others at all. So,
yeah, there's a number of authors on this one.
Right. That's really all I have. I mean, when I say plumage, it's not exactly their feathers like most plumages, because since they're hatchlings, it's mostly like their skin color.
Whatever that like starting the feathers they look when they start like most birds. It's like a fluffy, typically like a grayish color, so they blend into the nest and in a lot of songbirds, like the crevices of tree branches, things like that are those darker colors. Kind of helps them blend in. They stay small. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. So we're watching some evolution occur in cuckoos. Kind of like we said before, the certain plumages are being selected for because they're harder for the birds that they're. I mean, this is technically a type of parasitism. So the songbirds that are being parasitized are getting better at recognizing the imposters. So the imposters, the ones that are closer to their young, what their young should look like, are getting better at recognizing. So they have to look more like what the young should. I'm sure there's probably a selectivity for younger birds, like younger pairs nests. Like I'm sure older birds that have had multiple broods are probably better at recognizing imposters than younger birds. that are just starting.
Right.
I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know exactly how it works.
Yes and no, because at the same time, it's like if you're an older bird, like if this is your third or fourth nesting, none of that means that you've had a cuckoo in your nest before.
True.
So these are new experiences for them too, possibly.
That is true. Yeah, and I mean, some birds, like we have a pair of mourning doves that are nesting on our back porch, and they're on their third set of eggs already. They lay like 2 eggs at a time. They have a 14-day incubation period. So, I mean, they're already on their third clutch of eggs.
Right. And so
Yeah.
this is called brood parasitism. It's like when you think of parasitism, you think of like the ticks or the things that like the microparasites that live inside of you, like we've talked about on the show before with different types of worms, and we'll get into more in the next couple of weeks with when we get into arthropods, because that's our next grouping.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of arthropod parasites.
Right. So those are typically
real good
like
at it.
Your parasite host relationships, where it's
typically ectoparasites instead of endoparasites.
Right. But what brood parasitism is it's interferes with the reproduction of the species to increase the parasite's reproductivity. And
Okay.
as far as I know, obviously we're learning as we go through the show, cuckoos are some of the only species that do this type of behavior, or at least the most well documented.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool
that's
indeed.
Gonna do it for today's Nature in the News. I thought it was very cool. I found this.
Yeah.
And that's going to bring us into today's lesson. As we said at the start of the episode, today's lesson is on Gastropoda. It is going to be finishing up our discussion on mollusca. Last week we covered the bivalves and the cephalopods. So, Alex, if you want to get us started, like what is a gastropod?
Yeah, absolutely. So the gastropods, like I said before, those are your snails, slugs, sea slugs, kind of that group. Gastropod means, so if you get into a little bit of the naming, gastropoda means stomach foot. So if you think of a snail or slug, they crawl on their stomach, on the bottom of them. It's like their foot. So you can see on the screen a picture of a snail. Their stomach is where like the foot is what it is the name. It's a muscle, or it's like a collection of muscles that they use to move and to climb, grab on things, whatever. So that's what gastropoda means. So it's our most diverse group of mollusks with over 62,000 described living species. So this makes up 80% of all of the mollusks. So they are very widespread. There's a lot of different species of them. Freshwater, saltwater, terrestrial, they're pretty much everywhere. They're about as widespread as insects. So just to give an idea, they have a very long and rich fossil record because a lot of them have those shells. So that dates back to the early Cambrian, so many, many years ago. And they show extinction of many clades as well as others flourishing. So as some groups die off, they're not successful. Others flourish because different things make them more successful than others, especially
and a lot of that has to do with environmental factors. So
correct, yeah.
Eventually, the goal for the show is to kind of discuss the geologic time periods, kind of go on what was happening in the world at the time and how those factors influenced organisms. So in the Cambrian was a much different time period, mostly predominantly marine life forms, which I would assume so that many of the marine snails and stuff kind of got their starts there. And as you get to the Devonian, I believe it's either Devonian or Permian, one of those two, that's when terrestrial life started to form, but it was mostly invertebrates. So I assume these mollusks sort of had a huge kind of flourish there.
Next it goes Cambrian, and then it's like the Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian. So kind of as it goes. So by the time you get to the Devonian periods, when you really start seeing a lot of like your vertebrates, yeah, you start seeing some of your vertebrates, and then especially as you get towards like the Permian's like the end of the Paleozoic, which leads into the Mesozoic, which is the age of the dinosaurs.
But that's a topic for a different day. So we will slot back on track. We'll talk about some mollusks again. So as you were saying, what we said, they have a lot of flourishing and extinctions throughout their long history.
Correct. Yeah. So a lot of them, they're used as actually pretty prominent indicators in both your biological and paleobiological studies. So like you said, a lot of these kind of show what life was like back then. They respond differently, especially your aquatic snails and slugs and things are, if you see a big die off of those, it typically means there's a big change in your water chemistry very rapidly. Things like that. We use them now.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
We do macro and kick net testing and stuff like that, where you're testing your water chemistry in your streams and stuff, where those type 1 organisms that are the least adaptive to pollution and these chemical shifts. Typically,
correct.
Mollusks fit up in that top bit.
Correct. Yeah. And different mollusks are in different rankings as well. Snails tend to do better than your bivalves. So, of course, very diverse in size and morphology, occupy the widest range of niches out of all of the mollusks, and this is actually the only group that possesses terrestrial mollusks. So that's what makes them very unique. Why they're so successful. They're probably one of the first terrestrial organisms, if I had to bet, or at least they're very near the early stages of terrestrial organisms. Of course, I said located pretty much anywhere, and everywhere. Ocean surface, deep abyssal habitats, so deep ocean, freshwater, saltwater lakes, terrestrial habitats from mountains, deserts, up in the rainforest. Pretty much anywhere, except for if it's frozen, you'll find a gastropod.
I'd like to add on. You said how they're the only terrestrial mollusks. I know how we talked briefly last week about some mollusks, like mostly bivalves that were like intertidal species where they lived in tide pools, and tide pools do have a tendency to dry up. But that doesn't make the organism a terrestrial species. It still prefers that marine environment, but is able to go through that drought period of a low tide.
Correct.
In these tide pools.
Correct. Yeah. Meanwhile, like snails and slugs, they live pretty much their entire life out of water. Now, they still need to be moist. They prefer those moisture habitats, but like we said, you can find them in the desert. So they're incredibly widespread, very adaptable. The feeding habits vary by species. A lot are vegetarian or herbivorous. There are some that are carnivorous. They actually hunt. They're active predators. Some are detritivores. They eat dead material, but a lot of it involves, we talked about that radula. It's kind of like a hard tongue, kind of, they used to scrape.
It's a toothy type tongue. They use it as a grindstone almost to like grind down the plant fiber and get their nutrients based that way. And as you said, there's some carnivorous ones. I know we talked in the first episode on mollusks when we covered where did we cover that? I don't remember, but we talked about. I gave you that top 5 when we talked about the conch, like the geography cone. They hunt their prey.
Yeah,
using,
cone snails. Yes.
They hunt using a proboscis that has dagger knife type radula, and it ingests poison.
Correct. Yeah. So continuing on with our gastropods, most are separate sexes, so most are male and female. However, there are some that are hermaphroditic. A lot of folks realize that, especially if you keep like an aquarium. you have pet, you get snails. A lot of folks realize that the hard way when suddenly their fish tank is overrun with snails because they got hermaphroditic snails.
Or they learn the
Basal
hard way.
gastro.
They learn the hard way when they kind of see a slime sack dangling off their porch.
Correct.
Yeah. Seen
Yeah.
those before. They're cool.
Yeah. So your basal gastropods, they utilize the water column. So these are the ones that are on like your seafloor gastropods. Utilize the water column for external fertilization. So they just release the gametes into the water and they meet and become new gastropods. But a lot of your more derived species, especially like your terrestrial and freshwater species, actually do internal fertilization, where there's an exchange of the gametes using sexual organs. Now, the gastropods are characterized by a single shell. So you see snails, sea snails, freshwater snails. This is one shell. Now, this is, of course, lost in your slugs. But the body and the body in these shells undergoes a torsion. So there is pretty much in any of the shelled gastropods, there is a twist to the shell. It may not be dramatic, but there is a twist to the shell, which actually influences their internal structure, the way that their body is set up, and kind of where certain things are placed. And this can be both clockwise or counterclockwise. Is not specific to one direction. Actually, the different rotations, typically when we're talking about those indicator species, I believe one rotation tends to do better with pollution than another in freshwater environments. But that is subject to change as well.
And as Alex was kind of alluding to with this torsion and how it kind of affects their internals, this torsion kind of leads to a loss of some internal organs. Not that these gastropods are too advanced in terms of their internals, but it does tend to. I had it pulled up. Yeah, so they turn their organ systems into figure eights. They can either lose organs on either side of the midline, and the shells themselves coil from, or typically ends on the left or right. So very rarely are there snails where it's in a straight line. You can see the coil, and there is no drift to either side, as you can see in the images on screen for our video listeners.
Correct. Yeah. And then most have a well-developed head. Is that like they usually have a clear head with tentacles that they kind of use to feel around as they move. And then typically primitive eyes are not super complex eyes. Some of them, especially your more derived genera, have them on stalks. And like in the video, that bottom right image shows a snail. It has both the tentacle and the eyes on stalk, so they're kind of up above the head, gives a little bit better viewing of the surroundings.
These bottom ones are the tentacles they use for taste, feeling, and just general sensory organs, and their eyes are on these upper stalks here. Same Correct. For this snail up here. Not so much seen in other species.
Yeah. So as I said before, all gastropods possess a foot, which is a muscular surface that they use for crawling, but they have been used for things like burrowing, for snails that kind of burrow into the ground or into sediment. Leaping, I guess there are snails that can actually kind of bounce. They're probably more...
Those are found in the conch. In the conch.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, swimming and then clamping is like grab onto things. Like we talked about those cone snails, they'll clamp down onto their prey using that foot to kind of hold it as the poison does its work, or the venom, I should say, does its work.
Limpets
and then
use the
limpets,
because limpets are technically gastropods.
Yeah. And then most, if they have a shell, they have what is called an operculum, which is just a hardened kind of organ That's part of the foot that they use to seal the shell when the organism retracts back into the shell. So it's kind of like a hard plate that just kind of like a door, it just closes that shell. Helps add an extra layer of protection. Not all gastropods possess this, which is why some are more easily predated than others. Things will be able to kind of basically pull the soft tissue out from the opening. And then, of course, although they, as we said, although they may seem to show that bilateral symmetry, they are actually asymmetric due to that torsion. So there is not symmetry down. If you split the gastropod in half, if it shows torsion, you cut it down the middle, it is asymmetrical because that twist in the shell causes a shift of the organs to one side or another. So now Tyler go on, talk about some of the smaller groups, or some of the groups that they get down into to get a little bit more particular.
Right. So okay, we kind of have this split into, I believe, 5 smaller groupings. When you go further down, first is Neratopsina, which is comprised of marine, freshwater, and terrestrial families. The larger species is the Nerididae. They are mostly marine and freshwater lineages, although some can live in that brackish water we talked about in previous episodes, that semi-salt, semi-fresh, typically estuaries. And there's been many incidents where that Nerididae family has invaded into freshwater habitats. And it's also a very prehistoric grouping. We've had species all the way dating back to the Devonian period that we have coming from this Neratopsina family. Mostly all shapes and sizes. They can have that coil shape that you're used to seeing in snails, all the way to a limpet shape. And as we get to the limpets further on down the list, I'll kind of explain what that limpet shape is. It's more of a circular kind of. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's more of a not coil like most of them are, kind of just like a cup, an upside down cup or bowl. There is one species in this family that is a slug. It is called the Tudiscania. And we'll move on to the next one, the fatigue Vetagastropoda, which is the keyhole and slit limpets, the abalones, slit shells, top shells, and other species. So these are all marine. Once again, they have that coil or limpet shaped shell. Get you a screen share really quick.
Yeah, so your limpets are more like your barnacles, actually.
But barnacles,
I believe.
Molluscs.
Correct. I should correct myself. They look more like barnacles, where it's more like that, just almost like a volcano shape, where it's kind of just a cone. So that second from the right picture is your limpets.
Yeah.
Or second from the left, sorry.
In this case, that is a keyhole limpet. You can kind of see the small hole. This is the apex where my cursor is for our video listeners, and right above it is this keyhole. That's why we call it a keyhole limpet. To
Correct.
the left of that is the abalone, very popular
yes.
and like a shellfish seafood diet. Very good.
Yeah. Yeah, and the shells, especially on the inside, they're very colorful. They tend to have a bit of that.
We were talking about last.
Yeah, it's a very shiny, like a bluish, kind of very colorful, shiny interior. And then, of course, to the right of that is a snail, and to that far right picture, I believe, is actually a picture, a zoomed in picture of what like the radula look like.
Correct.
Kind of that toothy, like very rough tongue that they use to scrape food.
Right. Yes. Moving on to our next group, the Gastropoda. This is one of the larger families. It's completely marine, larger groupings. It comprises about 100 families when we get in that classification. They include the littorines, the cowries, the creepers, the worm snails, moon snails, frog shells, apple snails, and mostly a large group of 20 marine families, which are in the carnivorous clade of Neogastropoda. So these are your whelks, murcids, harps, cones, and augurs. So that is that carnivorous prey hunting snail versus the radula-based, scrapey, grindy tongue.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, and the thing, looking at this one picture on here, the thing that's kind of unique to the cone snails is they're actually, they open up, and they have like a almost like a proboscis from that narrow end instead of the wide end of the shell, where most gastropods kind of open up from. They use that proboscis from the narrow end, and that's what contains that like kind of harpoon they use. Yeah, so that bottom right picture there, you can see the foot and then that proboscis that comes out.
Correct.
And then, of course, yeah, the top right picture, you can see how big some gastropods can get, like that snail on the size of an American dollar bill, which is it's roughly like 6 to 8 inches wide.
That is an apple snail.
Yeah, so they get very large. So I don't know what that is in centimeters.
14. That's what they measured
14?
that was 14 centimeters.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it is on here. I see that now.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Nice.
We'll move into our next grouping of gastropods, the Heterobranchia. This is one of the larger groups, although it's one of the more recently recognized clades. These are split into two groupings: the Apistobranchia and the Pulmonata. So the Apistobranchs, which is 25 families and about 2,000 species, they comprise of bubble shells and the sea slugs, as well as sea hares. These are all marine with a shell reduction or shell loss, and whatever shell-bearing basal species that they do have, they lack the operculum that we were talking about. The second grouping of this, the pulmonatas, or the pulmonates. These are mostly your land snails and slugs. These have about 20,000 species as well. So this has a lot of the more predominant freshwater snails as well in this pulmonate grouping.
Yeah.
Operculum is absent in all pulmonates except for the estuarine family of Amphibolidae and Glacidorbidae. So I will give you a quick picture here on some of these pulmonates and the other heterobranch.
Yeah. So that group, the pulmonates, that is your group. That is your terrestrial, like pretty much almost all of your terrestrial gastropods fit into that group.
Right.
Which makes sense. Think pulmonate, like lung.
Pulmonate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would show that roughly. So the top left species is a marine snail from the Apistobranchs, followed by a nudibranch from also the
Apistobranchs. Those are like your sea hares.
Sea hares, sea slugs. Yeah, sea slugs are pretty cool species. I wish we had more time to talk about them.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll cover it on another episode later on in life. And cool. The rest are primarily your pulmonates. And then the last...
your variety of snails and slugs.
Yeah. The last variety that I'd like to talk about for us today is the Patellogastropoda. So, patella means knee or cap shape, like cap. So, like your patella is your knee in your body.
That's your kneecap, yeah.
Yeah. So they are cap-shaped gastropods, the true limpets. They are what we talk about when we talk about that clinging foot. They use it to suck onto these rocks. Uh, True limpets are not restricted to the intertidal zones like some of the other false limpets, like those keyholes, or those slit limpets. They can be found deep underwater, deep sea, hydrothermal areas, and there's even some species that live exclusively on sunken driftwood. And as I said, all of these are marine. They are limpet shaped, so that cap-shaped shell versus the curly spiral shaping of the snails. And they lack an operculum in adults. As they kind of get older, they kind of are able to keep themselves more secure, so they don't need to have that operculum for safety.
Yeah. Okay.
But some species have been seen to kind of strengthen the radula they use to feed by using some metallic ions in it. And that's true for some other species as well. They use aluminum or iron ions to kind of strengthen different parts of their body, whether it's their shell or their radula.
Correct. Yeah, there's a species of snail I know that lives near hydrothermal vents that actually, instead of having like a calcareous shell, they actually have a ferrous shell. They actually incorporate iron into their shell to deal with the high temperatures.
Volcano
And
snails.
that would deal with both the high temperatures and the very typically very corrosive water, because there's a lot of the volcanic chemicals that are involved with that. But they look very cool as well. They're like a really dark red and black color.
Mm-hmm.
Like their foot is like a blood red, and their shell is black. It's very cool.
Like this.
Like that. Yes.
They are
Super cool.
scaly foot gastropods, also known as volcano snails. As we said, they live
Very
in
cool.
hydrothermal vents. You can kind of see that scaly foot they use with that iron, and same thing with their shell. Um, that's enough of that, I'd say. That concludes the lesson as well. So we will
Yes, sir.
go ahead and move on to our recurring segments. First, we'll start with you, Alex. What do you have for us in our most wanted for the week? I know you said you were going to mix it up a bit, kind of go off topic a little bit. I know we did so well. We had 1 week.
I know we had a couple weeks. So mixed up because I already talked about a gastropod earlier, I believe, with the Chinese mystery snail. So this week we're going to switch it up and we're going to go with a plant. So the plant invasive. What's that?
We could talk about the African land snail.
I could have, but we're going to switch it up a little bit. Yeah. Talking about this week the Amur honeysuckle, Lonicera maki. It is a species of kind of a bushy, large shrub, almost tree size. It actually gets to tree size in some cases. Native to the temperate parts of Asia, especially like northern and western China, southern Mongolia, southern Korea, Siberia, Korea, parts of Japan. Which is funny because it actually says in Japan it's on the endangered species list for Japan. So in that endemic region of Japan, it's endangered. Meanwhile, in the United States, especially the eastern United States, it has become a pretty significant invasive species. So it's a large shrub. It can get up to about 6 meters or 20 feet tall. And they get fairly broad as well. It kind of was initially brought over as a ornamental plant because it has nice little white and yellow flowers. Or it has white flowers that have like very nice yellow stamens that grow out of it. And then when after those flowers go to fruit, they make the picture. After they go to fruit, they have a bright red berry that grows out of that. But like many other invasive plants, brought over as an ornamental and has since escaped, especially because the way their seeds are, they're very attractive to birds. So the birds disperse the seeds, causing it to quickly spread, and is a very voracious growing plant in the understories of many woodlands. Along fence rows, they form very dense thickets, and of course has been banned in many cases because it is an invasive species. However, it's still is a very see it a lot. It grows very densely. One stump will grow many different leads in many different varying directions. So they form tall kind of hedgerows. Especially we've seen it, especially at school, where along the edge of the woods it would grow in very dense patches. Kind of a pain to deal with. So something to keep an eye on. If you see this tree or this bush species, get rid of it.
Yeah,
Alex, not at least in the United States.
Alex is not kidding when he says it's banned. We used to make a joke around campus that our nature trail on campus was held up by privet and honeysuckle.
Correct. Yeah.
Two very invasive species.
Yes, which is very unfortunate, but that is something. And of course, the flowers. Of course, children tend to enjoy them because if you pull the bottoms off of the flowers, if you there's typically a little piece of nectar, and it's where the honeysuckle comes from. That nectar underneath is very sweet. So that's why a lot of people, especially kids, they'll pick a lot of those flowers and suck on the nectar. But the berries, however, are mildly poisonous, so don't eat them. They're not good for you. Birds can eat them. Birds like them a lot, but they're not for people.
Right.
So yeah, they like I said, a dark green color. They have alternate flowers or alternate leaf arrangement. Kind of a dark green, and the bark is a very rough, kind of flaky look. They like long, stringy bark that kind of flakes off, peels off.
Since we haven't gotten into plants yet, we're going to cover the animal kingdom first. Would you like to explain to our listeners what the alternate leaf structure is?
Yeah, kind of what it means. So it's how the leaves grow off of the stem, unlike those twigs where the leaves grow off of on a typically your woody plants is where that is really talked about. Alternate means that they're not as each bud that the leaf grows off of, they kind of alternate. So you have one here and one above it on the opposite side of the twig, and it continues up to the end. So seen in most woody species, you see that arrangement. There is also an alternate opposite, where they are directly across from each other. You see that a lot in like your maples, ashes, your horse chestnuts, and your dogwoods.
Right.
So those are at least in America, those are your native species that you'll see that in, especially your maples and your ashes. Those are fairly common. They have that opposite, and then there's other arrangements as well, like whorl, WHORL, where they kind of grow in like a clump, like your oaks. They tend to grow like that. So just we can dive into that a little more when we start talking about our plants, get into a little bit of plant morphology. But just as a quick, this is what that means.
Right. Do you have anything else to add about your myrrh honeysuckle?
I do not, other than get rid of it if you live. It's mostly in the eastern United States as well as in New Zealand. And in the United States, it is a significant invasive species. So if you live in the eastern United States, you see this plant, do us all a favor, cut it out, get rid of it. They are a pain to cut because have very springy wood that kind of grows in a lot of funky directions, that bends, a lot of bends. It kind of grows within itself, makes it very difficult to cut and remove. So, but it is worth the time and effort if you don't want an infestation.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So that is our invasive species of the week. Moving on then to your segments, our amazing species. You did understand the assignment this week and found us a gastropod.
I did. I did find a gastropod. However, I don't know if we actually found a gastropod, because what I chose is called Stagnicola utahensis. It is also known as the thick-shell pond snail. This species was labeled as critically endangered way back in 2012, and it needs updating again. When they did this survey, it was only found in 2 areas, so the Great Salt Lake and the Utah Lake. However, when I look at the red list today, it tells me they are both extinct in those areas, and I have no extant ranges. So I'm a little bit confused on it.
Yeah, because just doing a quick search here, what I'm seeing is that the last living snails were found in the early 1930s.
Right, exactly. So we haven't found any actual species of the snail, and with things like this where they have that calciferous shell, it's really hard to date how old it is when we find just the shells. So a living species is obviously the best thing we have. And since we're saying these things haven't really been seen since the 1930s, we weren't really doing this type of work when it comes to conservation.
So I pulled up here a picture of like an artist rendition of the shell of the thick shell pond snail.
Right. So it's kind of got, it's a thick shell pond snail. It's got a little bit thicker in terms of not so much the oil in the shell, but the actual thickness of the shell. It lives in freshwater, mostly wetland areas. Some threats that we've had are droughts and the temperature extremes, and especially out in the western United States, they get slammed by wildfires and drought all the time. There's not really any just environmentally peaceful times in terms of weather and things like that.
Not at all.
It's not really used in anything. Not in the pet trade, obviously, since we don't have any living species since the 1930s. And it kind of makes you think it's like a red herring, kind of like the thylacine is, where it's like, is it still around or is it not? Obviously, the thylacine gets some more love because it's a mammal and it's a little bit larger than a snail.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, even if they are extinct, they can still be an amazing species because they haven't been extinct for that long that they'd quite fit into our next segment.
Right.
Transition.
Yes. Our next segment. We are going back in time from the vault. We have found the Pelagiella exigua, which is actually a species of gastropod found back in the Cambrian period. And so why I chose to do this one is because they have that was it Kite that we were talking about a few weeks ago when we talked about the annelids. So it kind of throws a wrench into our phylogeny and our taxonomy on where do we throw these things in terms of other ancestors, because as far as we know, annelids, and I'm not off the top of my head, but it's in this article that I have. This article that I found is from Roger Thomas and Bruce Runiger and Carrie Matt, published in 2020 in Paleontology. That is the journal it's published in. But basically, it explains these gastropods from the Cambrian had these chetae that they would use. They extended off the foot or close by the foot, and they were found in Lancaster County, PA. And we talk about it a lot. Two of us are from Pennsylvania, so it's kind of close to home for us. And these are the most well preserved, not only just of this species, but they're so well preserved that we are able to see this chetae.
Yeah. So these would be a very early in the evolution of gastropods and mollusks in general. These would be a very early fossil of gastropods, especially for as well preserved as it is, allows us a lot of research, kind of a lot of what am I trying to think of? Leeway, I guess, in research. Allows us to look closer at some of those harder things you don't really get to look at quite as much. Like I said, like those little parapodia.
So in annelids, the chetae is used as a movement device. They use bristles to kind of help them move. So my thought process, I didn't get to read the full article. We were kind of crunched for time and getting this prep work done for tonight.
Correct.
my hypothesis is that this chetae was used kind of like as an intermediate between
like the foot.
And I just like, because as much as the mollusks, these gastropods were starting to evolve this foot, I'd assume that the earliest gastropods did not have as strong of a foot as modern ones do to help them move. So I'd assume this chetae kind of supplemented that movement. And as you can see in these images, this top image here is just in the formation, the amount of this specific species that they found in such close proximity. Focusing
they're not very big for as well. Only a few millimeters in size.
Right. Obviously, this middle image focuses in on a single species, a single organism from the species. You can see those fan-like structures. Those chetae we were talking about. The structures that house these chetae. And a further close-up in the bottom image.
Yeah, super cool.
Right. So these chetae have been found in the annelids and the brachiopods, but are also not featured in any other mollusk besides this one. So you kind of get thrown in that wrench thrown in of, well, how does this relate? Like, where do we put this in the tree? And it's very difficult to actually kind of narrow it down because it's so far away from anything else that would be related to the other things that have it. But that's kind of like, is it just a divergent evolution or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
But they're so similar in purpose. Yeah. It's probably just a divergent evolution that they're so similar in purpose, but they don't share any type of form to the other ones.
Yeah, that's something they may need to find more species that are kind of in between to really know the answer. If this is something that is an ancestor to a lot, or if it's something that kind of diverged on its own and then was not very successful.
Right, and further down in this article, they kind of lay out this table here, and let me zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole table in this one image. So these blue lines on this tree for our video listeners kind of shows you that they keep those genes that have the proteins to make these chetae in the gastropods.
So CMT, chitinous microfibril tubules is what CMTs mean, which is what the structural components of the chetae.
Right. So, the blue boxes are your class mollusk, correct? Monoplacophora, bivalvia.
Yeah. Yeah, cephalopoda, gastropoda.
Scaphopoda, all those things. So as you can see, the CMTs are still around in some species, so we lose them in others. But all the Chaetae is found in annelids, linguiforms, and other more primitive species. And we're trying to connect the dots on it.
Yeah.
But let us know your hypothesis. Let us know what you think, how these relate. If you want to read the article, as I said, it was published in the Paleontology Journal. The article is titled Pelagiella exigua, an early Cambrian stem gastropod with Chaetae, Lophotrochozoan heritage, and coniferan novelty. As I said, written by Roger Thomas, Bruce Runiger, and Carrie Matt. Very interesting article if you get a chance to read it. But that's all I have for this. That's going to bring us to our end.
That's very cool. Yeah.
And as we do at the end of every episode, we ask that you please follow us on Spotify if you have not already. Make sure you go back, binge all the other episodes so you can get caught up.
Yes.
Follow us. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Give us a like on our videos. Leave a comment down below. Anything you want to see, anything you like. Tell us the things that you like in the video so we know what to keep adding into our other episodes as we go down the line. Follow us on Facebook at Life the Complete Story. Follow us and like our posts on Instagram. I know I've been slacking. The two of us have been really busy.
Yes.
But I do plan on posting something this week because last weekend we did something cool. And we saw something really cool. But you got to follow us on Instagram to find out.
Yes, sir.
Am I missing anything? Email us.
Yes.
Email us at lifecompletestory@gmail.com. Once again, let us know what you like, what you don't like, things you find interesting, amazing species you find, pictures you find. We can highlight on the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And then YouTube. Did you mention the YouTube already?
I did mention the YouTube.
Okay, good. But yeah, like always on Spotify, YouTube, whatever, give us a like, follow, subscribe, whatever, rate us on Spotify.
Do the algorithm stuff.
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah, help us share with your friends. You never know when they might find something we talk about interesting. And as Tyler said, we'd love to hear from you, hear about some amazing species that you want us to talk about, or just something that we've talked about that you want us to cover in more depth. Let us know. We'd love to hear.
Right. That's going to do it for us this week on Life the Complete Story. As always, I've been Tyler, joined by Alex. And at the end of the episode, you know what we say.
Keep learning.
Learn something new.
Absolutely.
That's for us this week.
Yep. Appreciate you guys joining us. See you next week.